Good morning friends, myself Sagar Shah and we learn about engineering mechanics. Today we study about the second unit, fundamental of statics. We start from the definition of force. Force, an agent which can produce, tends to produce or produce motion of the body or change the state of the motion and rest of the body. 1 Newton unit of force is Newton. 1 Newton force produce 1 meter per second square acceleration on 1 kg mass. Resultant force, if number of forces acting on a particle be represented in magnitude and direction, then it is possible to find out the single force which can replace these all forces and produce the same effect as they all produce. For example, P1, P2, P3, P4 forces acting on a particle, then it is possible to find out the single force, resultant force, which could replace these all forces and produce the same effect. Resultant force is denoted by R, and as I say before, force is denoted, unit of force is Newton. There are many methods of finding resultant force in engineering mechanics. And composition of forces, the method of finding the resultant force is called composition of forces. There are many methods of finding resultant force in engineering mechanics: analytical method and graphical method. In analytical method we have to study parallelogram law of forces, resolution of forces, and in graphical method we study triangle law of forces and polygon law of forces. If two forces acting on a particle and we have to find resultant force, then we use parallelogram law of forces, and also two forces acting on a particle and we have to find resultant force by graphical method, then we use triangle law of forces. If more than two forces acting on a particle and we have to find resultant force, then we use the method resolution of forces, and by graphical method we use polygon law of forces. Parallelogram law of forces, if two forces acting on a particle be represented in magnitude and direction, then their resultant force be represented in magnitude and direction by the diagonal sides of parallelogram. It means if two forces, for example two forces P and Q acting on particle O, then these two forces be represented in magnitude and direction by the two adjacent sides of parallelogram, then their resultant force be represented in magnitude by the diagonal side of parallelogram. We represent these two forces by vector on the two sides of parallelogram, then their resultant force we get on diagonal sides of parallelogram. The formula to find the resultant force is R equal to under root P square plus Q square plus 2PQ cos theta, where theta is equal to angle between the two forces P and Q, and where alpha is the angle between the resultant force and P force, and we have to find alpha, then we use the formula tan alpha equal to Q cos theta upon P plus Q sin theta. We get this equation by the proving of parallelogram law of forces. We discuss it later. Then second method, if more than two forces acting on a particle and we have to find resultant force, then we use resolution of forces method. Resolution of forces method, in which we have to find resultant force. We get resultant force after first step. First, divide the inclined force into two components, in which we have to divide the inclined force into two components: vertical component and horizontal component, cos component and sin component. Algebraic sum of horizontal, second step है algebraic sum of horizontal force, in which the forces which acting in left hand direction we consider it negative, and forces which acting in right hand direction we consider it positive. We find sigma as, then we find sigma v. In sigma v, we consider only vertical forces, in which the forces which acting in upward direction we consider it positive, and the forces which acting in downward direction we consider negative. Then after finding sigma h and sigma v, we find resultant force and its quadrant, in which quadrant resultant force lie. The formula for finding resultant force are equal to under root sigma h square plus sigma v square. Then direction of sigma resultant force, at which angle resultant force lie on a quadrant, del alpha equal to mod of sigma v upon sigma h. Then sigma upon the value of sigma h and sigma v, we find the quadrant of resultant force. If the value of sigma h and sigma v both are positive, then resultant force lie on a first quadrant. If sigma h negative and sigma v positive, then resultant force lie on second quadrant. If both are negative, then resultant force lie on a third quadrant. And if sigma h positive and sigma v negative, then resultant force lie on a fourth quadrant. I gave example for resolution method. There are more than two forces acting on a particle, P1, P2, P3, P4 and P5, in which first step divide the inclined force into two components, in which P3 and P4. P3 is horizontal forces and P4 is vertical forces. Then we divide the inclined forces into two components. Then we divide the P1 in two components, horizontal component and vertical component. P1 creates 30 degree with horizontal line, then its horizontal component is cos and vertical component is sin. It means P1 cos 30 and P1 sin 30. Then P2 creates 20 degree angle with vertical line, then its vertical component cos and horizontal component sin. It means P2 cos 20 and P2 sin 20. P3, there is no need to divide its components because it's already horizontal force. P4 is vertical force and P5 is inclined force. Then we divide it into two components, P5 cos 60 and P5 sin 60. Then we calculate sigma h, algebraic sum of horizontal force. In this we consider only horizontal force like P1 cos 30, P2 sin 20, P3 and P5 cos 60, in which P1 cos 30 acting in right hand direction, so we consider it positive. Then P2 sin 20 acting in left hand direction, so we consider it is negative. P3 also acting in left hand direction, then we consider P3 as a negative. And P5 cos 60 we consider it is a positive because P5 cos 60 acting in right hand direction. Then after finding sigma h, we find sigma v, in which we consider vertical forces. Then P2 cos 20, P1 sin 30, P4 and P5 sin 60 are vertical forces. P2 cos 20, P1 sin 30 both are acting in upward direction, then we consider it as a positive. And P4 and P5 sin 60 acting in downward direction, we consider it as a negative. After finding sigma h and sigma v, we find resultant force are equal to under root sigma h square plus sigma v square and its quadrant. Then we find direction of the resultant force. Thank you.